When Lewis Hamilton posted a simple message supporting human rights protesters, he had no idea he was about to uncover the biggest conspiracy in sports history. What started as one Instagram post would lead to kidnapping attempts, car sabotage, and a dramatic live television confrontation that changed Formula One forever. But the most shocking truth was still hidden. For 20 years, someone close to Lewis had been fighting the same battle from the shadows, gathering evidence, and building cases against the corrupt network that would eventually try to silence the world's most famous racing driver. This is the story of how a father's love, a son's courage, and one explosive broadcast brought down an international conspiracy and sparked a global revolution for athletic justice. It all began on a quiet morning in Monaco, when Lewis saw something on his phone that he couldn't ignore. The morning sun painted golden stripes across Lewis Hamilton's Monaco apartment as he sat at his marble kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone. Steam rose from his untouched coffee cup while his eyes stayed glued to the screen. The videos made his stomach turn. Young protesters in Bahrain, peaceful people holding signs about freedom, police in riot gear pushing them to the ground, mothers crying as their children were arrested. Lewis's hands shook as he watched. These weren't just videos to him. Bahrain was where he raced every year, where thousands of fans cheered for him, where he smiled and waved from the podium while people suffered just miles away. He opened Instagram and started typing, "I stand with the brave people of Bahrain fighting for their basic human rights. Your voices matter. Your lives matter. We cannot stay silent." When his phone rang, the sound made him jump. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but the name made his jaw clench. Marcus Webb, F1 commercial. Lewis had met Marcus a few times at official events. He was the kind of man who wore expensive suits and fake smiles. The kind who shook your hand while already planning to stab you in the back. "Hello," Lewis answered, keeping his voice steady. "Lewis, Marcus Webb from Formula One. Hope I'm not calling too early." Marcus's voice was smooth like oil, but Lewis could hear the tension underneath. "What's this about, Marcus?" "Well, I've been keeping an eye on your social media. Very passionate stuff lately. The posts about human rights, social justice, that sort of thing." Lewis looked at his unfinished Instagram post. And some of our biggest sponsors are getting a bit nervous. You know how it is. They invest millions in Formula One because they want to be associated with excitement, glamour, winning, not controversy. The word hit Lewis like a slap. Controversy? I'm talking about people's lives. I understand that, Lewis. I really do. But you have to think about the bigger picture here. Formula One is a business, a very expensive business. When drivers start taking political stances, it makes everyone uncomfortable. Lewis stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Political stances? I'm talking about basic human rights. Look, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying maybe it's time to focus on what you do best, racing. You're moving to Ferrari next year. This should be about celebrating your career, not other things. The threat was clear even though Marcus never said it directly. Lewis felt his heart pounding. He'd been in Formula One for 17 years. He'd won 7 championships. He'd broken records that people said could never be broken. But in this moment, he felt like a scared kid again. "Are you telling me what I can and can't say?" Lewis asked. Marcus laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Of course not. I'm just suggesting you think about your future, and Mercedes' future, and Formula One's future. We're all connected, Lewis. When one part of the machine breaks down, it affects everything else." Lewis stared at his reflection in the kitchen window. He saw a successful man in an expensive apartment with trophies on the walls. But he also saw something else, a person who was being asked to trade his voice for his career. "What if I don't? Want to stay quiet?" The silence on the other end lasted forever. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was colder. "Then I guess we'll have to see what happens. But Lewis, I really hope you'll make the smart choice here. For everyone's sake." The line went dead. Lewis stood there holding his phone, staring at the unfinished Instagram post. His finger hovered over the delete button. Footsteps in the hallway made him look up. Sarah Chun, his assistant, walked in carrying a stack of mail and her tablet. She was young, smart, and one of the few people Lewis trusted completely. She'd been with him for 3 years, handling everything from his schedule to his charity work. "Morning, Lewis. You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah set down the mail and studied his face. Everything okay? Lewis showed her his phone screen with the unfinished post. They want me to stay quiet. Sarah read the post, then looked at the videos Lewis had been watching. Her face went pale. Who's they? Formula One. The sponsors. The people who control everything. Lewis slumped back into his chair. Marcus Webb just called. He basically threatened me. Sarah sat down across from him. What did he say exactly? Lewis repeated the conversation, watching Sarah's expression grow more serious with each word. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Lewis, you know I support whatever you decide. But this is scary. These people have a lot of power. I know. Lewis looked at his phone again. The cursor blinked in the text box like a heartbeat. But how can I stay quiet when people are suffering? Sarah reached across the table and put her hand on his. What does your heart tell you? Lewis thought about his childhood in Stevenage. His father working multiple jobs to pay for his racing. His mother's pride when he won his first championship. The young fans who looked up to him. The responsibility that came with his platform that he thought about the protesters in the videos. People his own age fighting for freedom. People who didn't have his wealth or fame or protection. People who needed voices like his. My heart tells me to speak up, he said quietly. Sarah nodded. Then maybe that's what you should do. Lewis looked at the post one more time. The words seemed to glow on the screen. I stand with the brave people of Bahrain fighting for their basic human rights. Your voices matter. Your lives matter. We cannot stay silent when innocence is met with violence. He took a deep breath and pressed post. The response was immediate. His phone started buzzing with notifications. Likes, comments, shares, but also angry messages from numbers he didn't recognize. Within minutes, his phone was ringing again. Lewis. Hamilton's office, Sarah answered professionally. She listened for a moment, then covered the phone with her hand. It's Toto Wolff. He sounds upset. Lewis felt a chill run down his spine. Toto was his team boss at Mercedes. More than that, he was a friend. If Toto was calling this quickly, it meant the pressure was already starting. Tell him I'll call him back, Lewis said. Sarah hung up, but the phone immediately rang again. Then, again. Each call seemed more urgent than the last. Lewis, Sarah said, watching the notifications pile up on his phone. I think you just started a war. Lewis looked at his post, now shared by thousands of people around the world. Comments poured in, some supportive, others angry, all of them passionate. He'd opened a door that could never be closed again. Then I guess I better be ready to fight, he said. Outside his window, Monaco sparkled in the morning sun. Yachts dotted the harbor. Expensive cars wound through the streets. It was a beautiful place for beautiful people living beautiful lives. But Lewis wasn't thinking about beauty anymore. He was thinking about the protesters in Bahrain. About the phone call from Marcus Webb. About the choice he'd just made. His phone buzzed with another call. This time it was his father, Anthony Hamilton, calling from England. Dad? Lewis answered, already knowing what this conversation would be about. Son, I just saw your post. Are you sure about this? Lewis looked at Sarah, who was watching him with worried eyes. He thought about Marcus Webb's threats, about the calls from his team, about the war he'd just started. No, Dad, I'm not sure about anything anymore. But I couldn't stay quiet. No, son. I know. Just be careful. These people don't play fair. As Lewis hung up, he realized his father was right. The people who ran Formula One didn't play fair. They played to win, no matter what it cost. But Lewis Hamilton had been winning his whole life. And he wasn't about to stop now. 2 weeks later, the Bahrain International Circuit felt like enemy territory. Lewis walked through the paddock, his Mercedes team shirt feeling heavier than usual. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the way. People looked at him, or didn't look at him. Formula One officials who usually greeted him with warm smiles now hurried past with their eyes down. Journalists who normally fought for his attention suddenly seemed very busy with their phones. The sun blazed overhead, but Lewis felt cold inside. Lewis, a familiar voice called out. He turned to see Roberto Silva, a mechanic from McLaren who'd known him since his rookie days. Roberto jogged over with a worried expression. Hey man, just wanted to say I saw your post about Bahrain. Took guts. Roberto glanced around nervously. But be careful, okay? Word is going around that some people aren't happy. Before Lewis could respond, Roberto was gone, melting back into the crowd of team members and officials. Lewis stood there feeling more alone than ever. His phone buzzed. A text from Toto Wolff, my office. Now, the Mercedes motorhome was usually Lewis's safe space. But today, walking up the stairs felt like climbing to a courtroom. Toto sat behind his desk, looking older than his 51 years. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. Close the door, Toto said without looking up. Lewis had known Toto for years. They'd celebrated championships together, shared victories and defeats. But today, Toto felt like a stranger. Toto, what's going on? You know what's going on. Toto finally looked at him. The phone calls haven't stopped since your Instagram post. Sponsors, F1 management, even some government officials. Everyone wants to know what Mercedes is going to do about Lewis Hamilton. Lewis felt his stomach drop. What do you mean, do about me? 3 sponsors have already called emergency meetings. Petronas is asking questions. The commercial department is going crazy. Toto rubbed his temples. Lewis, I support you personally. You know that. But this is bigger than personal feelings. So what are you saying? I'm saying that Formula One is a business. A very expensive business. When our biggest star starts talking about politics. Human rights aren't politics. Lewis's voice rose. These are people's lives we're talking about. I know that. You know that. But sponsors don't see it that way. They see controversy. They see risk. They see their brand being associated with things that might hurt their sales. Lewis sat down heavily in the chair across from Toto. So what? We'll find new sponsors. Toto laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Lewis, it's not that simple. These contracts are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You can't just replace that overnight. Are you asking me to apologize? The silence stretched between them like a canyon. Toto couldn't meet Lewis's eyes. I'm asking you to think about the bigger picture. Your teammates, the mechanics, the engineers, hundreds of people whose jobs depend on this team being successful. Lewis felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. So you want me to stay quiet while people suffer? I want you to be smart about how you use your voice. What if being smart means being silent? What if being smart means letting injustice continue? Toto stood up and walked to the window overlooking the track. Lewis, you're one of the greatest drivers who ever lived. You've got one more year with us, then you're going to Ferrari. Don't throw it all away over this. The words hung in the air like smoke. Lewis realized what Toto was really saying. Choose your career or choose your conscience, but you can't have both. I need some air, Lewis said, standing up. Lewis, wait. But Lewis was already walking out, leaving Toto alone in his office. That evening, Lewis called his father from his hotel room. The sound of Anthony Hamilton's voice was like a warm hug. How are you holding up, son? Not great, Dad. It feels like everyone's turning against me. Tell me what happened. Lewis described his meeting with Toto, the cold treatment from F1 officials, the worried look in Roberto's eyes. His father listened without interrupting. Dad, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm hurting innocent people? The mechanics, the engineers. They didn't ask for this. Anthony was quiet for a moment. Lewis, do you remember when you were 8 years old? You came home from school crying because a bigger kid was picking on a smaller boy. Yeah. And what did you do? Lewis smiled despite his pain. I stood up to the bully. Got detention for it. And what did I tell you? That standing up for what's right sometimes costs you something. But staying quiet when people are being hurt costs you more. That's right. Son, I'm proud of you for speaking up. But I'm also scared. These people have a lot of power. I know. But what choice do I have? You always have a choice, Lewis. The question is, can you live with yourself if you make the easy choice instead of the right choice? After hanging up, Lewis couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Toto's words, about the mechanics and engineers, about the protesters in Bahrain. Every choice seemed wrong. The next morning brought practice sessions. Lewis arrived at the garage to find his usual spot surrounded by unfamiliar faces. His regular mechanics looked uncomfortable. His race engineer, Pete Bonington, avoided eye contact. Morning, Lewis, Pete said quietly. We've made some setup changes to the car. What kind of changes? Just optimizations. But when Lewis got in the car, something felt wrong immediately. The steering was loose. The brakes felt spongy. The engine response was delayed. These weren't optimizations, they were problems. Pete, the car feels terrible, Lewis radioed during his first practice run. Copy that. We're looking into it. But Lewis could hear whispered conversations in the background. People talking in hushed tones. People who wouldn't normally be on his radio channel. His lap times were 3 seconds slower than normal. 3 seconds in Formula One might as well be 3 hours. Other drivers flew past him like he was standing still in the garage. Lewis overheard two mechanics talking by the tire wall. Maybe if he focused more on driving and less on politics. One of them said, "Shoo, he might hear you. So what? I'm just saying, we're here to race cars, not change the world." Lewis's heart sank. Even his own team was turning against him. The press conference that afternoon was worse. Lewis sat at the long table with 5 other drivers, facing a room full of journalists. Cameras from around the world pointed at them like weapons. Amanda Foster, a reporter from Sky Sports, raised her hand. "Lewis, there's been a lot of discussion about your recent social media posts. Some people say drivers should stick to racing. What's your response?" This was it. His chance to explain, to make people understand why this mattered. Lewis leaned toward his microphone. "I think that..." The microphone went dead. No sound came out. Lewis tapped it, confused. "We seem to be having technical difficulties with Lewis's microphone," the moderator said smoothly. "Let's move on to the next question." Lewis looked around the room. In the back, he saw Marcus Webb standing with a group of F1 officials. Marcus caught his eye and smiled. The same fake smile from their phone call. Lewis tried his microphone. Again, still nothing. "Actually, I think Lewis's audio is working fine," Amanda Foster said, looking suspicious. "Lewis, can you try again?" But the moderator was already calling on another journalist. "Next question, please." Lewis realized what was happening. They weren't just pressuring him to stay quiet. They were actively silencing him. The microphone hadn't broken. Someone had turned it off. He looked around the room full of journalists, people whose job was to report the truth. But no one said anything. No one questioned why his microphone had mysteriously stopped working. Lewis stood up. Every camera in the room followed him. He opened his mouth to speak, but without a microphone, his voice barely carried past the first row. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said, his voice getting louder. "They're trying to silence anyone who speaks up for justice." But the moderator was already moving to the next question, drowning out Lewis's voice. Security guards appeared at the exits, not threatening, but present. A reminder of who was really in control. Lewis walked out of the press conference, knowing that the real fight was just beginning. The cameras captured him leaving, his face a mixture of anger and determination. Outside the media center, Sarah was waiting with his phone. Her face was pale. "Lewis, you need to see this." She showed him the trending topics on Twitter. #SilenceLewis was #1 worldwide. Videos of his cut microphone were going viral. People around the globe were asking the same question. Why was Formula One trying to silence Lewis Hamilton? "It's working," Sarah said quietly. "People are noticing." Lewis looked at his phone, watching the support pour in from fans, celebrities, and fellow athletes. But he also saw the angry messages, the threats, the people calling him ungrateful. "Yeah," he said, "but I don't think they're going to make this easy for us." As they walked back to the Mercedes motorhome, Lewis noticed more security guards than usual, more officials watching his every move, more people with earpieces and serious expressions following him. The pressure was building from every direction. But Lewis Hamilton had been dealing with pressure his whole life. The difference was, this time the pressure wasn't about lap times or championships. This time, it was about who he was as a person. And that was something worth fighting for. Back in his hotel room that night, Lewis couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Marcus Webb's fake smile and heard the dead silence from his microphone. He kept replaying the day's events, trying to make sense of what was happening to him. At 2:47 a.m., his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "They're watching everything you do. Be careful who you trust." A friend. Lewis sat up in bed, his heart pounding. Who was this? How did they get his private number? He tried calling the number back, but it went straight to voicemail with no greeting. That he screenshot the message and sent it to Sarah, even though she was probably sleeping. His phone rang immediately. "Lewis? Are you okay?" Sarah's voice was thick with sleep and worry. "Someone just warned me that I'm being watched." "Sarah, what if this is bigger than we thought? I'm coming over. It's almost 3 a.m. I don't care. Something's not right about any of this." 20 minutes later, Sarah arrived with her laptop and a concerned expression. They sat at the small hotel room table, trying to piece together what was happening. "The microphone thing today wasn't an accident," Sarah said, pulling up videos from the press conference. Look at this. She showed him footage from multiple angles. In one shot, you could see a technician in the back of the room adjusting equipment right before Lewis's microphone went dead. And here, Sarah pointed to another video. Marcus Webb is talking to that technician just before it happens. Lewis felt sick, so they planned it. It gets worse. Sarah opened her laptop. I've been digging into Marcus Webb's background. This guy isn't just some F1 commercial director. She showed him a series of documents she'd found online. Marcus Webb had worked for several sports organizations over the past decade. In each job, he'd been involved in controlling what athletes could say publicly. Look at this, Sarah said, pointing to an article from 2019. When he worked for FIFA, 3 players who spoke out about worker conditions in Qatar suddenly found themselves benched for disciplinary reasons. And before that, she continued scrolling, he was with the Olympics Committee when they silenced athletes who wanted to protest about human rights in Beijing. Lewis stared at the screen. So this is what he does. He silences athletes for a living. It looks that way. But Lewis, who's paying him to do it? F1 doesn't usually care this much about what drivers say. That was the question that kept Lewis awake for the rest of the night. Who was really behind this? The next morning brought an unexpected phone call. The caller ID showed Rebecca Torres, ESPN. Mr. Hamilton? This is Rebecca Torres from ESPN. I'm an investigative journalist, and I've been following your story. I think we need to talk. About what? About why Formula One is so desperate to silence you, and about what I've discovered regarding their financial relationships. Lewis looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. Where do you want to meet? Somewhere. Private. This conversation could be dangerous for both of us. They arranged to meet at a small cafe in Manama, away from the racing circuit. Rebecca Torres was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a serious expression. She carried a thick folder and looked around nervously before sitting down. Mr. Hamilton, what I'm about to show you could change everything you think you know. About Formula One, she said quietly. She opened the folder and slid a document across the table. It was a financial report showing F1 sponsorship deals with various companies. 3 of Formula One's biggest sponsors have direct financial ties to the Bahraini government, Rebecca explained. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. Lewis studied the documents. The numbers were staggering. Companies that seemed completely unrelated to Bahrain were actually owned by investment funds controlled by the government. So when I posted about human rights in Bahrain, you directly threatened their business relationships, Rebecca finished. These companies don't want to be associated with criticism of their business partners. She showed him more documents. Email chains between F1 officials and sponsor representatives discussing the Lewis Hamilton problem. This email is from last week, Rebecca said, pointing to a message from a sponsor executive. It says, Hamilton's activism is costing us credibility in key markets. Something needs to be done. Lewis felt his hands shaking as he read. They're not just trying to silence me about Bahrain. They want to silence me completely. It gets worse, Rebecca said. I have sources inside F1 who say there's a coordinated plan to make your life so difficult that you'll stop speaking out. On your own. What kind of plan? Rebecca lowered her voice. Car problems that can't be traced. Media blackouts. Maybe even race penalties for minor infractions. They want to break you without making it obvious. Lewis thought about his cars. Strange behavior during practice, the cut microphone, the cold treatment from officials. It was all starting to make sense. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because someone needs to expose what's happening. And you're the only driver with enough influence and courage to do it. Rebecca slid another document across the table. This is a list of other athletes who've been silenced by similar tactics. Soccer players, Olympic athletes, tennis players. It's happening everywhere. Lewis read through the names. Some he recognized, athletes who'd suddenly stopped talking about social issues, who'd mysteriously had career problems after speaking out. What happened to them? Some gave up and stayed quiet. Others had their careers destroyed. A few disappeared from public life completely. Lewis felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying they're threatening people? I'm saying that when big money is involved, powerful people will do whatever it takes to protect their interests. After Rebecca left, Lewis sat in the cafe for another hour, staring at the documents. Everything he'd worked for, his career, his reputation, his platform, was under attack. But now he understood why. He called Sebastian Vettel, his longtime friend who'd retired from F1 the year before. Seb had always been outspoken about environmental and social issues. "Louis, how are you holding up?" Sebastian's voice was warm but concerned. "Not great, Seb. I need some advice. Did you ever face pressure to stay quiet about the causes you supported?" Sebastian was quiet for a moment. "All the time. But Louis, you have something I never had." "What's that?" "A bigger platform. More influence. And more courage to use it. But what if it destroys my career?" "Then you'll have to decide what matters more, your career or your conscience." Louis already knew the answer, but hearing it out loud made it real. "My conscience." "Then you know what you have to do." "But Louis, be careful. These people play for keeps." That evening, Louis made a decision that would change everything. He called Sarah to his hotel room and laid out all the documents Rebecca had given him. "We're going to expose this," he said. "All of it." Sarah looked worried. "Louis, this is dangerous. These people have unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. Then we better be smarter than them." Louis pulled out his phone and started recording a voice memo. "If anything happens to me, I want people to know the truth. F1 isn't just trying to silence me. They're part of a bigger system that silences anyone who threatens their business interests." He documented everything. The phone call from Marcus Webb, the car problems, the cut microphone, the financial documents Rebecca had shown him. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of systematic censorship. "What's the plan?" Sarah asked. "We're going to Saudi Arabia next week. That's where they'll try to silence me completely. But instead of staying quiet, we're going to fight back." Louis looked out the hotel window at the lights of Manama. Somewhere in this city, people were fighting for their freedom. People who didn't have his platform or his resources. "They think they can scare me into silence," he said quietly. "But they're about to learn something about Lewis Hamilton." "What's that?" "I don't scare easy." His phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. "The deeper you dig, the more dangerous this becomes. They know you're investigating. Watch your back." Louis showed the message to Sarah. Her face went pale. "Maybe we should tell someone. The police, or tell them what? That I got a mysterious text message? That I think F1 is conspiring against me?" Louis shook his head. "We need proof. Real proof that can't be denied." He looked at the documents spread across the table. Financial records, email chains, a list of silenced athletes. It was damning evidence, but would it be enough? "There's something bigger here," Louis said, studying the papers again. "This isn't just about F1. This is about a whole system designed to keep athletes quiet." Sarah picked up one of the financial documents. "Look at this company name. I've seen it before." She pulled out her phone and did a quick search. "Louis, this investment fund doesn't just work with Bahrain. They have connections to governments in Saudi Arabia, Russia, China, basically every country where F1 races and human rights are questioned." Louis felt the pieces clicking together. So every time we race in one of these countries, F1 is making money from the same governments that are oppressing people. And when drivers speak out about human rights, it threatens those business relationships. Louis stood up and walked to the window. Below, the streets of Bahrain looked peaceful. But he knew that just a few miles away, the protesters from his Instagram video were probably still in jail. "They're using our sport to wash their reputation," he said. "They pay F1 millions to host races. And in return, F1 makes sure none of the drivers criticize them. What are you going to do?" Louis turned back to Sarah, his expression determined. "I'm going to expose all of it. In Saudi Arabia, in front of the whole world." "Louis, that's incredibly dangerous." "I know, but staying silent is even more dangerous. For me, for the sport, and for everyone who's counting on people like us to speak up." As they packed up the documents, Louis's phone rang one more time. This time it was his father. "Son, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. About standing up to bullies." "Yeah, Dad. There's something I never told you about that day when you were 8. About why you really got detention." Louis frowned. "What do you mean? The teacher who gave you detention?" She knew the bigger kids. Parents. Rich parents who donated money to the school. "She didn't punish you for fighting. She punished you for embarrassing the wrong people." Louis felt a chill. "Dad, why are you telling me this now?" "Because sometimes the system protects the bullies, son. And sometimes the only way to beat them is to expose the whole system." After hanging up, Louis looked at Sarah. "My dad just confirmed what we already knew. This isn't just about me, And it's not just about F1. It's about a whole system that protects the powerful and silences the powerless. So what do? Lewis picked up the folder of evidence. We tear the whole system down. 2 weeks later, Lewis's private jet touched down in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Through the small window, he could see the modern city rising from the desert like a mirage. Gleaming towers and wide highways stretched to the horizon. But Lewis knew that beneath the shiny surface, the same problems existed here as in Bahrain. Maybe worse. Saudi Arabia had an even darker record on human rights than Bahrain. Women activists in prison, journalists who disappeared, protesters who vanished in the night. Lewis had spoken about these issues before, and he knew that coming here was like walking into a trap, but that was exactly why he had to be here. You sure about this? Sarah asked as they gathered their bags. She'd been nervous ever since they left Monaco. It's not too late to change your mind. Lewis looked at the folder containing all their evidence, financial documents, email chains, recordings of his conversations with F1 officials. 2 weeks of careful planning had led to this moment. I'm sure, he said, if we're going to expose this conspiracy, we need to do it where the whole world is watching. The Saudi Arabian Grand Prix was one of the biggest races of the year. 400 million people would be watching the pre-race show on Sunday. It was the perfect stage for what Lewis had planned. But first, they had to survive the weekend. The Jeddah Corniche circuit was beautiful and dangerous, with walls that came right up to the track edge. One mistake, and you'd hit concrete at 200 miles per hour. Lewis had always thought it was the perfect metaphor for racing in Saudi Arabia. Beautiful on the surface, deadly underneath. As they drove from the airport, Lewis noticed more security than usual. Black SUVs with tinted windows seemed to be everywhere. At red lights, he saw men in suits talking into earpieces and watching their car. They're following us, Sarah whispered. I know. Rebecca warned us this would happen. Rebecca Torres had arrived in Jeddah the day before, officially covering the race for ESPN. But her real mission was to help Lewis expose the truth. She'd brought a small camera crew that would film everything, making sure the world saw what happened at the hotel. Lewis found his usual room had been upgraded to a suite on the top floor. The concierge explained that F1 had requested the change for his security and comfort. But Lewis knew the real reason. The higher floor made it easier to watch him and harder for him to escape if needed. As he unpacked, Lewis found tiny holes drilled in the walls near the bed and desk. Hidden cameras, poorly concealed. They weren't even trying to hide their surveillance anymore. His phone rang. Marcus Webb's name appeared on the screen. Lewis, welcome to Saudi Arabia. I hope you're ready for an amazing weekend. Marcus's fake friendliness made Lewis's skin crawl. What do you want, Marcus? Just checking in, making sure you're feeling cooperative this weekend. We wouldn't want any more microphone problems, would we? The threat was clear. Lewis looked at Sarah, who was quietly setting up a small recording device. They'd learned to document everything. Actually, Marcus, I'm looking forward to the press conferences this weekend. I have a lot to say. The silence on the other end was telling. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was colder. Lewis, I really hope you'll reconsider. For your own good. Is that a threat? It's friendly advice. Saudi Arabia can be a dangerous place for people who don't watch what they say. After hanging up, Lewis felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Sarah was pale as she checked the recording device. He basically just threatened you, she said. Good. Now we have it on tape. That evening, Lewis met Rebecca Torres in the hotel's coffee shop. She looked nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder. My editor wants to pull me from this story, she said quietly. Someone called ESPN Corporate. Big advertiser threatening to cancel contracts if they run anything about F1 and Saudi Arabia. Lewis felt his heart sink. So you're leaving? Hell no. This is the biggest story of my career. But we need to be smart about this. They're watching everything we do. Rebecca slid a small device across the table. It looked like a regular pen, but she explained it was actually a tiny wireless microphone. This connects directly to our satellite uplink. Whatever you say during the pre-race show, the whole world will hear it, even if they cut the official microphones. Lewis pocketed the device. What if they try to stop the broadcast? They can't. We'll be live on multiple networks worldwide. Once you start talking, there's no stopping it. As they talked, Lewis noticed the same black SUVs parked outside the hotel. Men in suits sat at nearby tables, pretending to read newspapers while obviously listening to their conversation. "They're not even trying to be subtle anymore," Rebecca muttered. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe they want me to know I'm being watched." Later that night, Louis couldn't sleep. Every noise in the hallway made him jump. Every shadow outside his window looked suspicious. He kept thinking about Marcus Webb's words, "Saudi Arabia can be a dangerous place." At 3 a.m., he got another message from his anonymous friend. "They know about your plan. Sunday's broadcast will be your only chance. After that, they'll make sure you never speak publicly again." Louis showed the message to Sarah, who was also awake, sitting by the window keeping watch. "Louis, maybe we should call this off. This is getting too dangerous. We can't stop now. Too many people are counting on us." Louis thought about the protesters he'd seen in videos. People who risked everything to speak out about injustice. People who didn't have his platform or protection. If he backed down now, he'd be abandoning them. The next morning brought practice sessions, and Louis's worst fears came true. His Mercedes felt completely wrong from the first lap. The steering pulled to the right. The brakes grabbed unevenly. The engine hesitated every time he tried to accelerate. "Pete, something's seriously wrong with this car," Louis radioed to his engineer. "We're looking into it, Louis. Just do your best." But Louis could hear whispered conversations in the background. People who shouldn't be on his radio channel. People who didn't work for Mercedes. His lap times were terrible, 5 seconds slower than his teammates. Other drivers lapped him easily. In the garage, mechanics shook their heads and whispered among themselves. "Maybe he's lost it," Louis heard one say. "Or maybe he's too distracted by politics to focus on racing," said another. Louis realized this was part of the plan. Make him look incompetent on track so people would dismiss anything he said off track. During the lunch break, Charles Leclerc called with disturbing news. "Louis, I just heard from Ferrari management. They're asking questions about your activities." Louis felt his stomach drop. Ferrari was supposed to be his fresh start next year. His escape from the pressure at Mercedes. What kind of questions? About your activism. About whether it might affect your performance. About whether they should reconsider your contract. Are they backing out? Not yet. But Louis, maybe you should tone things down until you officially join us? Just until this blows over. After hanging up, Louis realized he was truly alone. Even his future team was wavering. If he went through with his plan on Sunday, he might lose everything. His current team, his future team, maybe his entire career. Sarah found him sitting in the garage, staring at his broken race car. "Bad news from Charles?" she asked. Louis nodded. "Even Ferrari's getting cold feet. So what do we do?" Louis looked at his car, then at the cameras filming practice sessions, then at the hills surrounding the circuit where he knew Saudi security forces were watching. "We stick to the plan. Sunday, during the pre-race show, I tell the world everything. Even if it costs you your career. Especially if it costs me my career. That'll prove I'm telling the truth." That afternoon, Toto Wolff visited Louis in his hotel room. The Mercedes team boss looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "Louis, I came to make one last appeal. Please don't do whatever you're planning for Sunday." "What makes you think I'm planning something?" Toto laughed bitterly. "Come on, Louis. The mysterious meetings, the recording devices, the journalists following you around. It's obvious you're building up to something." Louis studied his team boss's face. "Are you here as my friend or as a representative of Mercedes?" "Both. As your friend, I'm worried about you. As a Mercedes representative, I'm terrified of what you might say. What if what I have to say needs to be said? Then say it after you retire. Say it when it won't destroy other people's lives." Louis thought about the hundreds of Mercedes employees who might lose their jobs if sponsors pulled out. Good people who'd done nothing wrong except work for a team whose driver wouldn't stay quiet. "Toto, what if staying quiet means more people get hurt? What if speaking up means the people you care about get hurt?" It was an impossible choice, and they both knew it. After Toto left, Louis sat alone in his room, weighing his options. On one side, his career, his team, his future. On the other side, his conscience and the people counting on him to speak up. His phone buzzed with one final message from his anonymous friend. "Tomorrow they'll try to stop you before you even get to the microphone. Be ready for anything." Louis looked at the message, then at the folder of evidence sitting on his desk. In 12 hours, he would either expose the biggest conspiracy in sports history or lose everything he'd worked for his entire life. He picked up his phone and called his father. "Dad, tomorrow I'm going to do something that might end my career." "What are you going to do, son?" "I'm going to tell the truth." Anthony Hamilton was quiet for a long moment. "Then I'm proud of you. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you." As Lewis hung up, he realized that his father's pride mattered more than his career, more than money, more than anything else in the world. Tomorrow, he would walk onto that stage and tell the world what he'd discovered. And whatever happened after that, he would face it with his head held high. Sunday morning in Jeddah felt like the calm before a storm. Lewis woke up at 5 a.m., his heart already racing. Today was the day he would either change Formula One forever or destroy his own career. He looked out his hotel window at the sunrise, painting the desert sky orange and red. Somewhere in this beautiful, dangerous city, people were imprisoned for speaking the truth. Today, Lewis would speak for them. His phone showed dozens of missed calls from F1 officials, Mercedes executives, and even his manager. They all wanted the same thing: to convince him to stay quiet. Lewis deleted the messages without listening to them. A soft knock at his door made him freeze. It was too early for room service. Too early for Sarah. Lewis approached the door carefully and looked. Through the peephole, two men in dark suits stood in the hallway. They weren't hotel staff. "Mr. Hamilton," one called through the door. "We're from Track Security. We need to speak with you about today's event." Lewis's blood ran cold. They'd found him. Somehow, they knew about his plan. "Just a minute," Lewis called out, his mind racing. He grabbed his phone and quickly sent a text to Sarah. "Security at my door. Plan compromised. Go to backup location." He opened the door with a forced smile. "Gentlemen, what can I do for you?" The larger man stepped forward. "We've received reports about potential security threats at today's race. We need to escort you to a secure location for your protection." "What kind of threats?" "The kind that require immediate action," the second man said. "Please gather your things. We leave now." Lewis realized this was the trap his anonymous friend had warned him about. They were going to isolate him before the pre-race show, making sure he never reached the microphone. "Can I call my assistant first? She'll be worried if I disappear." "No time," the first man said, stepping into the room. "Your safety is our priority." Lewis backed away slowly. "I appreciate the concern, but I feel perfectly safe here." "Mr. Hamilton, you don't understand the severity of the situation." The second man moved to block the door. Lewis was trapped. "Actually, I understand perfectly," Lewis said, pulling out his phone. "I understand that you're not really security. I understand that this isn't about my protection. And I understand that I'm being kidnapped." He pressed record on his phone's camera and held it up. "My name is Lewis Hamilton. It's 5:23 a.m. on Sunday, March 19th. Two men claiming to be security are trying to force me from my hotel room to prevent me from speaking at today's Formula One broadcast." The men lunged for his phone, but Lewis was quicker. He tossed it under the bed and grabbed a lamp from the nightstand. "Stay back," he shouted. "Help! Someone help me." The larger man pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. "This will be easier if you don't fight." Lewis swung the lamp, catching the man in the shoulder. The syringe flew across the room and shattered against the wall. Lewis ran for the bathroom and slammed the door, locking it behind him. His hands shook as he called Rebecca Torres. "Rebecca, they're here. Two men trying to drug me. The plan is blown." "Lewis, listen to me carefully. Can you get to the window?" Lewis looked at the bathroom's small window. It led to a narrow ledge 20 floors above the street. It's 20 stories up. The ledge connects to the service ladder. "I'm watching from across the street. You can make it." Loud banging echoed from the bathroom door. The men were trying to break it down. "Sarah's already at the backup location with all our evidence," Rebecca continued. "If you can get out of there, we can still do this." Lewis looked at the window, then at the door starting to crack under the men's assault. He had no choice. He climbed through the window onto the narrow ledge. The morning wind whipped around him as he carefully moved along the building's edge. "Don't look down," he told himself. "Just keep moving." Behind him, he could hear the men breaking into the bathroom. Angry voices shouted into radios. They'd discovered his escape. The service ladder was rusty and old, but it held his weight as he climbed down. By the time he reached the alley behind the hotel, black SUVs were surrounding the building's front entrance that Rebecca's rental car waited in the shadows. "Get in," she shouted. Louis dove into the passenger seat as Rebecca gunned the engine. They raced through Jeddah's back streets, taking random turns to avoid being followed. "How did they know?" Louis gasped, still shaking from adrenaline. "Someone leaked our plan. Someone close to you." Louis felt sick. Someone he trusted had betrayed him. But who? They arrived at the backup location, an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Sarah was there with Rebecca's camera crew, setting up equipment behind stacks of shipping containers. "Louis, thank God you're okay." Sarah ran to hug him. "When I got your text, I thought, I'm fine. But they almost had me." Rebecca was already on her phone with ESPN headquarters. "We're going live in 3 hours. I need satellite uplinks activated now." Louis looked around the warehouse. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. They'd planned to broadcast from the official F1 Media Center, but that was impossible now. "Can we still reach the same audience from here?" Louis asked. "Even better." Rebecca smiled grimly. "From here, they can't cut our signal or control our cameras. Whatever you say will go out unfiltered to the entire world." As the crew set up cameras and lighting, Louis's phone exploded with calls and messages. Marcus Webb called 6 times in a row. Toto Wolff sent urgent texts. Even Ferrari executives were reaching out, but there was one call Louis had to take. His father. "Son, are you all right? I just heard something happened at your hotel." "I'm okay, Dad, but things are getting dangerous." "Louis, maybe it's time to walk away. You've done enough." Louis looked around the warehouse at Rebecca's crew working frantically to set up the broadcast, at Sarah organizing their evidence, at people risking their own careers to help him tell the truth. "Dad, remember what you taught me about bullies? That sometimes you have to stand up to them, even when it's scary. These are the biggest bullies I've ever faced. If I don't stand up to them now, they'll keep hurting people." Anthony Hamilton was quiet for a moment. "Then make me proud, son." 2 hours before the broadcast, disaster struck again. Sarah's laptop, containing all their evidence, suddenly died. The screen went black and wouldn't restart. "It's been hacked," she said, her voice hollow. "Everything's gone. The financial documents, the email chains, the recordings. All of it." Louis felt the world collapse around him. Without evidence, his claims would sound like the rantings of a paranoid athlete. No one would believe him. "We can't do this without proof," Rebecca said sadly. "It'll be your word against Formula One's billions." Louis sat on a shipping crate, his head in his hands. They'd come so far, risked so much, only to have it all disappear at the last moment. Then his phone buzzed with a message from his anonymous friend. "Check your email. I saved everything before they destroyed it. Go get them, Louis." Louis opened his email to find dozens of documents. Every piece of evidence they'd lost, plus new documents he'd never seen before. Financial records going back years. Audio recordings of F1 executives planning to silence drivers. Video footage of meetings between Marcus Webb and foreign officials. "Who is this person?" Sarah whispered, looking at the evidence. "I don't know, but they just saved our lives." With 1 hour until broadcast, Louis finally felt ready. He had the evidence. He had the platform. And most importantly, he had the courage to use both to as Rebecca's crew did final equipment checks. Louis thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a kid in Stevenage dreaming of racing cars to a man in a Saudi warehouse preparing to expose international corruption. "You ready for this?" Rebecca asked, adjusting his microphone. Louis looked at the camera that would soon connect him to 400 million viewers worldwide. He thought about the protesters in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, about the athletes who'd been silenced before him, about future drivers who shouldn't have to choose between their careers and their consciences. "I've been ready my whole life," he said. Outside the warehouse, the sound of helicopters grew louder. Black SUVs were pulling up to the building's entrance. F1 officials had found their location. "They're here," Sarah said, watching through a gap in the shipping containers. "How long until we go live?" Louis asked. Rebecca checked her watch. 8 minutes. The warehouse doors started shaking as someone pounded on them from outside. Angry voices shouted demands to open up. "This is our only chance," Louis said. "Whatever happens, don't stop filming." As the pounding on the doors grew louder, Louis took his position in front of the camera. In 7 minutes, he would either change the world or lose everything trying. 5 minutes to air, Rebecca announced, her voice steady despite the chaos outside. The pounding on the warehouse doors stopped suddenly. Lewis could hear voices speaking in Arabic, then English. Someone was giving orders. They were planning something. "Lewis, we need to start now," Rebecca said urgently. "I don't think we have 5 minutes." "Do it," Rebecca signaled to her camera operator. "We're going live to ESPN, Sky Sports, and 12 other networks worldwide. In 3, 2, 1, a red light appeared on the main camera. Lewis looked directly into the lens, knowing that millions of people around the world were watching. His heart pounded, but his voice was calm. "My name is Lewis Hamilton. I'm speaking to you live from Saudi Arabia, where I'm about to tell you something that will change how you see Formula One forever." Outside, the sound of power tools started up. They were cutting through the warehouse doors. "For months, Formula One has been trying to silence me because I spoke out about human rights. They told me to stick to racing and stay quiet about injustice. But what I discovered is much worse than simple censorship." Lewis held up a document from his anonymous friend's evidence package. "Formula One's biggest sponsors are secretly owned by the same governments that oppressed the people I spoke out for. When I posted about human rights in Bahrain, I wasn't just criticizing a country. I was threatening hundreds of millions of dollars. In business deals, the warehouse doors burst open. Men in suits poured in, followed by Saudi security forces. Rebecca's crew kept filming as the men spread out, looking for the broadcast equipment. "They're here right now, trying to stop me from speaking," Lewis continued, his voice getting stronger. "But this is being broadcast live to 400 million people around the world. They can't silence the truth anymore." Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway, his face red with rage. He pointed at Lewis and shouted orders in Arabic. Security forces started moving toward the camera setup. "The man in the suit is Marcus Webb," Lewis said, looking directly at the camera. "He's not just an F1 commercial director. He's a professional silencer who's been paid to control what athletes can say about human rights." Marcus stormed toward the cameras, but Rebecca's security team blocked his path. The cameras kept rolling. "Stop this broadcast immediately," Marcus shouted. "This is illegal. You're broadcasting without permits." "The only thing illegal here is trying to silence the truth," Lewis shot back, still speaking to the camera. "Marcus, tell the world about your meetings with Saudi officials. Tell them about the money you received to keep drivers quiet." Marcus's face went pale. "You have no proof of that." Lewis pulled out another document. "Actually, I do. Financial records showing payments from Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and other countries to your personal accounts. Audio recordings of you planning to sabotage my car and cut my microphones." The warehouse erupted in chaos. Saudi security forces tried to reach the cameras while Rebecca's team fought to keep broadcasting. Shouting filled the air in multiple languages, but Lewis kept talking, his voice cutting through the noise. "This isn't just about me. For years, they've silenced athletes who tried to speak about injustice. Soccer players who criticized World Cup conditions. Olympic athletes who wanted to protest human rights violations. Tennis players who spoke about women's rights." He held up a list of names. "Here are 43 athletes whose careers were destroyed after they spoke out. Coincidence? I don't think so." A Saudi official reached the main camera and tried to turn it off, but the backup cameras kept rolling. The broadcast continued across multiple networks. "They tried to kidnap me this morning," Lewis continued. "Two men with syringes, claiming to be security. They wanted to drug me to keep me from speaking. Is this what we've become? Are we so afraid of the truth that we'll drug people to silence them?" Marcus Webb was screaming into his phone now, demanding that someone stop the broadcast. But it was too late. The footage was already streaming live across the internet. Lewis looked directly into the camera, his eyes filled with emotion. "I know this will probably end my career. Ferrari might cancel my contract. Mercedes might sue me. F1 might ban me forever. But some things are more important than careers." His voice cracked slightly as he continued. "To every young person watching, don't let anyone tell you that success means staying quiet about injustice. Don't let anyone convince you that your dreams and your conscience can't coexist." Tear gas suddenly filled the warehouse. Saudi forces were trying to clear the building. Rebecca's crew coughed and choked, but the cameras kept recording. "They're using tear gas now," Lewis said, his eyes watering, "on a man whose only crime was telling the truth." This is what happens when you threaten their business interests. Through the chaos, Lewis saw Sarah being arrested by Saudi security. She looked at him and mouthed the words, "Keep going. My assistant Sarah Chun is being arrested right now for helping me gather evidence." Rebecca Torres from ESPN and her crew are risking their careers to broadcast this truth. We're all here because we believe that silence in the face of injustice is betrayal. The tear gas was getting thicker. Lewis could barely see the camera anymore, but he knew it was still recording. Formula One is my life. I've been racing for 17 years. I've won championships, broken records, lived my dreams. But none of that matters if I can't use my voice to help people who are suffering. Marcus Webb finally broke through the security team and lunged at Lewis. "You're destroying the sport," he screamed. "You're destroying everything we've built." "No," Lewis said calmly, looking at Marcus while still speaking to the camera. "I'm saving it. The sport I love should be about bringing people together, not helping governments silence their critics." Saudi security finally reached the main camera and smashed it with batons. But the backup cameras on the shipping containers kept broadcasting. The world was still watching. "They're destroying our equipment now," Lewis narrated. "But it doesn't matter. The truth is already out there. 400 million people have heard what I had to say." Through the smoke and chaos, Lewis could see Rebecca being handcuffed. Her camera operator was on the ground, his equipment smashed. But somehow, impossibly, the broadcast continued. "To everyone watching, please don't let this be the end," Lewis said, his voice echoing through the warehouse. "Share this video. Tell people what you saw. Don't let them bury this story." A Saudi official finally found the last camera and pointed his gun at it. But before he could fire, Lewis delivered his final message. "They told me that speaking out would hurt Formula One. But staying silent about injustice, that's what really hurts. The sport I love should stand for something greater than money and politics." His voice was strong and clear despite the chaos around him. "I don't know what happens to me now, but I know that 400 million people heard the truth today. And truth, once spoken, can never be unspoken." The final camera went dark as the official fired. The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of sirens and helicopter blades. Lewis stood in the darkness, surrounded by Saudi security forces. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. His career was over. His life might be in danger. But he felt something he hadn't felt in months. He felt freed. As they led him away, Lewis thought about the protesters in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, about the athletes who'd been silenced before him, about the young people watching who would now know that speaking up was possible. Marcus Webb appeared beside him as they walked toward the warehouse exit. "Congratulations," Marcus said sarcastically. "You just destroyed your entire life for nothing." Lewis looked at him and smiled. "I didn't destroy anything. I built something. Something you can never tear down." "What's that?" "Hope." Outside the warehouse, dozens of police cars and military vehicles waited. News helicopters circled overhead. The world was watching Lewis Hamilton being arrested for telling the truth. But in his hotel room somewhere in the city, Lewis's anonymous friend was already uploading every piece of evidence to the internet. Financial records, audio recordings, video footage. Everything Lewis hadn't had time to share during the broadcast. The real revolution was just beginning. Lewis sat in a cold concrete cell in Jeddah, staring at the small window high above his head. 12 hours had passed since his arrest. 12 hours since he'd told the world the truth about Formula One's dirty secrets. He had no phone, no contact with the outside world, no idea what was happening. But he could hear it. Even through the thick walls, he could hear helicopters circling the prison, car horns honking in the streets, crowds of people chanting outside. Something big was happening in the city. The cell door opened with a loud clang. A Saudi official in an expensive suit walked in, followed by 2 guards. "Mr. Hamilton," the man said in perfect English. "My name is Colonel Al-Rashid. We need to talk." Lewis stood up slowly. "Am I being charged with something?" "That depends entirely on you." The colonel sat down across from Lewis at the small metal table. "Your broadcast yesterday has caused complications." "What kind of complications?" "The kind that affects international relations. The kind that costs governments money. The kind that makes powerful people very angry." Lewis felt a chill, but kept his voice steady. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm explaining reality." You've accused some very influential people of serious crimes. They want you to disappear quietly. And if I don't?" Colonel al-Rashid smiled coldly. "Accidents happen in Saudi Arabia. People get lost in the desert. Sometimes they're never found." Lewis's hands clenched into fists under the table. They were threatening to kill him. But something in the colonel's voice suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with that option. But the colonel continued, "There might be another way. A public apology. A statement saying you made everything up. A promise to never speak about human rights again. In exchange for what? Your life. And the lives of your friends." Lewis's blood ran cold. What friends? Sarah Chun and Rebecca Torres are also in custody. Very isolated custody. The kind where accidents are even more likely to happen. Lewis felt sick. Sarah and Rebecca were in danger because of him. Because he dragged them into his fight for justice. "I need to think about it," Lewis said. "You have 1 hour." After the colonel left, Lewis paced his small cell. Through the high window, he could still hear the commotion outside. Helicopters, sirens, crowds. Whatever was happening, it was getting bigger. Suddenly, the lights in his cell flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting eerie red shadows on the walls. In the distance, Lewis could hear shouting and running footsteps. The cell door opened again, but this time it wasn't the colonel. A young Saudi guard motioned frantically for Lewis to follow him. Quickly, the guard whispered, "We don't have much time." "What's happening?" "Revolution," the guard said simply. "Your broadcast started something that can't be stopped." They ran through dark corridors filled with the sound of alarms and shouting voices. The guard led Lewis through a series of doors and finally out into a loading dock where a small truck waited. "Get in the back," the guard ordered. "Stay hidden until we reach the safe house." As the truck drove through Jeddah streets, Lewis could see through small gaps in the canvas covering. The city was in chaos. Thousands of people filled the streets, holding signs and chanting. Many of the signs had Lewis's picture on them, along with messages about freedom and truth. "Let Lewis speak," they chanted. "Freedom for all." The truck stopped at a small house on the outskirts of the city. The guard led Lewis inside, where an incredible sight waited for him. Sarah and Rebecca sat at a kitchen table, both looking tired but unharmed. They jumped up when they saw Lewis. "Lewis!" Sarah ran to hug him. "Thank God you're okay. We heard. They were threatening you." "How did you escape?" Lewis asked, still in shock. Rebecca smiled grimly. "We didn't escape. We were rescued by people who saw your broadcast and decided to act." "What people?" The young guard stepped forward. "My name is Ahmed. I'm part of a network of Saudi citizens who've been working secretly for human rights. Your broadcast gave us the courage to act openly." Lewis looked around the safe house. Maps covered the walls, along with photos of protests happening around the world. Computer screens showed news coverage from dozens of countries. "Lewis, you need to see this," Rebecca said, pointing to one of the screens. The BBC was showing footage from London, where thousands of people had gathered outside the F1 headquarters. Similar protests were happening in Paris, New York, and dozens of other cities. Signs reading "Justice for Lewis" and "F1 must change" filled the streets. "It's not just about you anymore," Sarah explained. "Your broadcast exposed something much bigger. People around the world are demanding answers." Ahmed switched to another news channel. "And it's working." The screen showed a breaking news alert. 3 major F1 sponsors suspend contracts pending investigation. "Petronas pulled out this morning," Rebecca said. 2 other major sponsors followed within hours. F1 is losing millions by the minute. Lewis felt dizzy. His broadcast had done more than expose the truth. It had actually hurt the people responsible. Financially, there's more, Ahmed said, switching to an Arabic news channel. The Saudi government is facing international pressure. The UN Security Council called an emergency meeting. The European Union is threatening sanctions. Lewis watched in amazement as the news showed footage of government officials in emergency meetings, diplomatic cars racing through capital cities, and protesters in dozens of countries demanding justice. "How is this possible?" Lewis asked. "It's only been 12 hours. Social media," Rebecca explained. "Your broadcast went viral immediately. But more importantly, people were ready for this message. They were waiting for someone with your platform to speak out." Sarah showed him her laptop. "Look at this." The screen displayed hashtags trending worldwide. Hashtag truth not silence. Hashtag let athletes speak. Hashtag Hamilton was right. Millions of people were sharing the broadcast footage and demanding answers from F1. But it gets even better, Rebecca said with a grin. Remember your anonymous friend? The one who saved all our evidence. What about them? They've been busy. Rebecca pulled up a website that made Lewis's jaw drop. F1leaks.com showed hundreds of documents, audio recordings, and videos. Financial records proving the connections between F1 sponsors and oppressive governments. Audio of Marcus Webb planning to silence drivers. Video footage of secret meetings between F1 officials and foreign agents. Your anonymous friend didn't just save our evidence, Sarah explained. They had access to everything. Years of corruption, decades of silencing athletes, all exposed in one massive data dump. Lewis scrolled through the documents in amazement. Who is this person? How did they get all this? We don't know, Ahmed said. But whoever they are, they just gave the world everything it needs to tear down the corrupt system you exposed. The laptop chimed with a new message. Rebecca checked it and smiled. Lewis, you're not going to believe this. Sebastian Vettel just released a statement supporting you. So did Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, and 12 other current drivers. What did they say? Rebecca read from her screen. Sebastian wrote, Lewis Hamilton showed the courage we all should have. He risked everything to expose corruption that has plagued our sport for years. Every driver should support his fight for justice. Lewis felt tears in his eyes. For weeks, he'd felt completely alone. Now, his fellow drivers were standing with him. Max posted on Instagram, Sarah added. He said, Lewis was right to speak out. Drivers should have a voice beyond just racing. We support his courage and demand answers from F1. The news kept getting better. One by one, drivers were speaking out. Team owners were demanding investigations. Even some F1 officials were distancing themselves from Marcus Webb and calling for reforms. Ferrari called, too, Rebecca said quietly. They want to reaffirm their commitment to your contract. They said your courage is exactly what Ferrari represents. Lewis felt overwhelmed. But what about Mercedes? Toto. Ahmed switched to another news channel. See for yourself. The screen showed Toto Wolff at a press conference, looking tired but determined. I should have supported Lewis from the beginning, Toto was saying. He was right to speak out, and Mercedes was wrong to pressure him. We're conducting our own investigation into any attempts to sabotage his car or silence his voice. Lewis couldn't believe what he was hearing. Even Toto was supporting him now. The pressure worked both ways, Sarah explained. Once the world saw what was happening to you, everyone had to choose sides. Most chose justice over money. Ahmed's radio crackled with urgent Arabic. He listened intently, then turned to the group with a serious expression. We need to move you again. Saudi forces are searching the city for Lewis. They're desperate to find him before the international pressure gets worse. Where can we go? Lewis asked. British Embassy, Ahmed said. They've agreed to give you asylum until you can leave the country safely. As they prepared to leave the safe house, Lewis looked around at the maps and computer screens showing protests worldwide. 12 hours ago, he'd been a single person speaking truth to power. Now, he was the center of a global movement demanding justice. Ahmed, Lewis said as they headed for the door. Why are you helping me? You're risking your life for a foreign athlete. Ahmed smiled. Because you spoke for people like my sister. She was arrested last year for protesting women's rights. Your broadcast gave us hope that the world was listening. As they climbed into another truck, Lewis realized that his fight had never really been about his own freedom to speak. It had been about giving voice to people like Ahmed's sister. People who needed someone with his platform to amplify their message. The revolution was indeed just beginning. And Lewis Hamilton had lit the fuse that would burn down the corrupt system that had silenced so many for so long. 3 months later, Lewis Hamilton stood in the Ferrari garage at the Monaco Grand Prix, watching the most beautiful sight he'd ever seen in Formula One. His red racing car bore a message painted in bold white letters, Racing for Change. But that wasn't the beautiful part. The beautiful part was that every other car on the grid carried similar messages. Max Verstappen's Red Bull displayed truth over profit. Charles Leclerc's second Ferrari showed athletes have voices. Even the Mercedes cars that Lewis had once driven carried banners reading Never Again Silent. Formula One looked completely different now. Hard to believe it's only been 3 months, said Frederic Vasseur, Ferrari's team principal, standing beside Lewis. You didn't just change the sport, you transformed it. Lewis smiled, but his eyes were serious. The sport needed to be transformed. We just gave it the push it was waiting for. In the months since his dramatic broadcast from that Jeddah warehouse, Formula One had undergone the biggest revolution in its history. The changes started small but grew into something incredible. Marcus Webb was the first to fall. Within a week of Lewis's broadcast, he'd been arrested by Interpol on charges of corruption, money laundering, and conspiracy. The evidence from F1leaks.com had been overwhelming. Webb now sat in a Swiss prison, awaiting trial for crimes that spanned multiple countries and sports. But Webb's arrest was just the beginning. Look at this, Sarachin said, approaching with her tablet. She'd been promoted to Lewis's chief of communications for his new activism foundation. The UN just approved the Athletes' Rights Charter. Lewis read the document with amazement. The charter guaranteed athletes the right to speak about social issues without facing career penalties. It had been signed by over 100 countries and every major sports organization. And there's more good news, Sarah continued. The Ferrari Racing for Change program just got approved for expansion. We're now supporting human rights organizations in 12 countries. Ferrari had embraced Lewis's activism completely, creating the most progressive program in motorsport history. Instead of hiding from controversy, they celebrated drivers who used their platforms for justice. Mr. Hamilton, a young voice interrupted. Lewis turned to see a teenage girl holding a notebook, her eyes bright with excitement. I'm Amira, she said in accented English. I'm from Bahrain. I wanted to thank you. Lewis knelt down to her eye level. Thank me for what? My father was released from prison last month. He was arrested for protesting, just like the people in your Instagram post. The government let him go because of the international pressure after your broadcast. Lewis felt tears in his eyes. This was why he'd risked everything. Not for trophies or fame, but for moments like this. Your father is brave, Lewis told her. And so are you for speaking up. I want to be like you when I grow up, Amira said. Someone who uses their voice to help people. After Amira left with her family, Lewis wiped his eyes and looked around. The Monaco paddock. Everything was different now, but it was different in the best possible way. The F1 press conferences had become platforms for important conversations. Drivers regularly discussed environmental issues, human rights, and social justice. The sport's new leadership encouraged these discussions instead of silencing them. Lewis, a familiar voice called out. Rebecca Torres approached with her camera. Crew, now permanently assigned to cover F1's transformation. Rebecca, how's the new job treating you? Amazing. I never thought I'd see the day when F1 actively promoted investigative journalism instead of trying to shut it down. Rebecca had been promoted to head ESPN's new sports justice division after her coverage of Lewis's story won multiple journalism awards. Her team now investigated corruption in sports around the world. Any word on our anonymous friend? Lewis asked quietly. Rebecca shook her head. Still no idea who they are. But they keep sending us information. Last week they exposed match fixing in tennis. Next week, they're revealing corruption in Olympic bidding. Lewis smiled. Whoever his mysterious ally was, they were still fighting the good fight. 5 minutes to driver briefing, announced Pete Bonington, who'd followed Lewis from Mercedes to Ferrari. Pete had publicly apologized for the car's sabotage incidents, explaining that he'd been pressured by officials he couldn't identify at the time. The driver briefing was another sign of how much F1 had changed. Instead of just discussing racing rules, drivers now received updates on the sport's social impact programs. Today's briefing included a report on F1's new Human Rights Monitoring Committee. Gentlemen, said the new F1 president, Maria Santos, a former human rights lawyer who'd replaced the corrupt previous leadership. I'm pleased to announce that our Human Rights Monitoring Committee has successfully prevented 3 different governments from hosting races due to ongoing oppression issues. The drivers applauded. The old F1 would have raced anywhere for money. The new F1 had standards. Additionally, Maria continued, our Racing for Justice Fund has now donated $50 million to human rights organizations worldwide. This money comes directly from our new sponsors, companies that specifically want to support our social justice mission. Lewis looked around the room at his fellow drivers. Max Verstappen gave him a thumbs up. Sebastian Vettel, who'd come out of retirement to join the new F1 movement, nodded approvingly. Charles Leclerc smiled proudly. These weren't just competitors anymore. They were allies in a mission bigger than racing. After the briefing, Lewis found a quiet moment to call his father. "Dad, I wish you could see this. The sport has completely transformed. I can see it, son. I watch every race, every interview, every announcement. You didn't just save your own voice. You saved the voices of every athlete who comes after you. It wasn't just me, Dad. It was everyone who stood up when it mattered. That's what leadership is, Lewis. Inspiring others to find their own courage." As Lewis hung up, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. From that first Instagram post about Bahrain to his arrest in Saudi Arabia to this moment in Monaco, surrounded by a sport that now championed the values he'd risked everything to defend. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Lewis's heart skipped. Could it be his anonymous friend? "Thank you for starting this revolution. But the work isn't done. There are more sports, more athletes, more injustices to expose. Are you ready for the next fight?" A friend. Lewis looked at the message, then at the transformed paddock around him. Drivers discussing climate change with journalists. Team bosses planning charity initiatives. Sponsors competing to support the most progressive causes. Formula One had been saved. But his anonymous friend was right. There were other sports, other athletes, other battles for justice waiting to be fought. Lewis typed his response. "Always ready. Lead the way." He looked up at the Monaco sky, thinking about all the young athletes around the world who no longer had to choose between their careers and their consciences, who could speak up for justice without fear of being silenced. The revolution in Formula One was complete, but the revolution in sports was just beginning. That afternoon, Lewis climbed into his Ferrari for practice. As he drove past the grandstands, he saw thousands of fans holding signs. But these weren't just signs supporting drivers, they were signs supporting causes. "Save the Amazon," read one banner. "Free political prisoners," said another. "Athletes for justice," proclaimed a third. Formula One had become more than entertainment. It had become a force for positive change in the world. As Lewis accelerated down the Monaco street circuit, he smiled inside his helmet. He was still racing, still competing, still chasing victories. But now every victory meant something more. Now he was racing for change. And the whole sport was racing with him. The track ahead curved toward the harbor, where yachts floated peacefully in the Mediterranean sun. But Lewis wasn't thinking about luxury or glamour anymore. He was thinking about Amira from Bahrain, whose father was free because someone had found the courage to speak up. He was thinking about Ahmed's sister, who could now protest women's rights without facing arrest. He was thinking about all the future athletes who would never have to stay silent about injustice. Lewis Hamilton had wanted to change Formula One. Instead, he'd changed the world, and this was only the beginning. 1 year after his dramatic broadcast from Jeddah, Lewis Hamilton received a phone call that would change everything he thought he knew about his fight for justice. He was in his Monaco apartment, reviewing plans for the Hamilton Foundation's newest project, a global network of safe houses for athletes facing persecution, when his secure phone rang. The number was blocked, but Lewis had learned to answer these calls. They usually brought important information. "Lewis Hamilton. Mr. Hamilton, this is Agent Patricia Moore from MI6. We need to meet immediately." Lewis felt his blood freeze. MI6 was British intelligence. Why would they want to talk to him? "What's this about?" "It's about your father, Anthony Hamilton, and the real reason you were being silenced." The words hit Lewis like a physical blow. "My father? What does he have to do with any of this?" "Everything, Mr. Hamilton. Everything you went through, everything you exposed, it was all connected to your father's work. Work you knew nothing about." Lewis sat down heavily. "What kind of work?" "The kind that can't be discussed over the phone." "Can you meet me at the British consulate in Monaco in 1 hour?" "Ah, yes. But Agent Moore, is my father in danger?" "Mr. Hamilton, your father has been in danger for 20 years. You just never knew it." The line went dead. Lewis stared at his phone, his mind racing. 20 years. That would mean his father had been involved in something dangerous since Lewis was a teenager, just starting his professional racing career. He called Sarah immediately. "Sarah, I need you to meet me at the British consulate. Something's happening with my dad." "Lewis, you're scaring me." "What's wrong?" "I don't know yet. but I think everything we went through might be connected to something much bigger. An hour later, Lewis sat in a secure room at the British consulate, facing Agent Patricia Moore. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a serious expression. On the table between them lay a thick file marked Classified. "Mr. Hamilton, before I tell you anything, I need you to understand that what you're about to learn has been classified at the highest levels for 2 decades." Lewis nodded, his mouth dry. Agent Moore opened the file. "Your father, Anthony Hamilton, is not just a former railroad worker who supported your racing career. He's been one of MI6's most valuable intelligence assets for 20 years. Lewis felt the world spin around him. "That's impossible. My dad worked for the railroad. He's just a regular person." That was his cover. A perfect cover, actually. Who would suspect that a working-class father following his son around racing circuits was actually gathering intelligence about international money laundering and corruption? Agent Moore showed him surveillance photos of his father meeting with people Lewis didn't recognize. Official-looking documents with his father's signature. Bank records showing payments from British intelligence. Your father used his position in your racing career to monitor corrupt activities in motorsport. Every race weekend, every paddock, every sponsor meeting. He was watching and reporting back to us. Lewis stared at the photos in shock. "How long?" "Since you signed with McLaren in 2007. We recruited him when we realized that Formula One was being used to launder money and hide illegal activities by foreign governments." Agent Moore pulled out another document. "Your father's intelligence helped us track corruption in over 50 countries. Sports washing, human trafficking, arms dealing. Formula One was the perfect cover for international criminals." Lewis's hands shook as he looked at the evidence. His father, the man who'd worked multiple jobs to pay for his karting, who'd driven him to races in an old van, who taught him about courage and standing up for what's right, had been a spy. The people trying to silence you weren't just protecting F1's commercial interests, Agent Moore continued. They were protecting a massive international corruption network that your father had been infiltrating for years. So when I spoke out about human rights, you put your father's life in danger. The corrupt officials you exposed were the same people he was investigating. Marcus Webb wasn't just working for F1. He was hunting for the British agent who'd been feeding us information. Lewis felt sick. So everything that happened to me was them trying to get to your father through you. They knew someone in F1 was working for British intelligence. They suspected it might be connected to you because of your social activism. If they could pressure you enough, they thought you might reveal your father's activities. Agent Moore showed him more documents. The anonymous warnings you received? Those came from your father, using secure intelligence channels to protect you without blowing his cover. Lewis remembered the mysterious messages. "They're watching everything you do. Be careful who you trust." A friend. "Dad sent those. He was trying to protect you from a situation that was much more dangerous than you realized. When you decided to expose the corruption publicly, you unknowingly completed his mission." Agent Moore pulled out audio recordings. "These are conversations your father recorded over the years. Listen." Lewis heard his father's voice talking to unknown men about moving money, hiding financial records, and silencing anyone who might expose their activities. But Anthony wasn't participating. He was documenting everything for British intelligence. "Your father's work helped us build cases against corrupt officials in dozens of countries. When you exposed Marcus Webb and the F1 corruption network, you completed the biggest intelligence operation in sports history." Lewis felt tears streaming down his face. Why didn't he tell me? Because it would have put you in danger. And because he was incredibly proud of your natural courage and sense of justice. He didn't want to influence your activism. He wanted it to be genuine. Agent Moore showed him one final document. "This is a letter your father wrote to you, to be delivered only if his cover was blown. He wanted you to understand why he couldn't tell you the truth." Lewis opened the letter with shaking hands. His father's familiar handwriting filled the page. "My dear son, if you're reading this, it means you've learned about my real work. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth, but I needed to protect you. Every race weekend, watching you become not just a great driver, but a great man, was the proudest moment of my life. When you started speaking out about injustice, I knew I'd raised you right. You didn't need my guidance to find your conscience. You had it all along. The courage you showed in exposing the corruption wasn't learned from me. It came from your own heart. I love you, son. And I'm proud that you chose to fight for what's right, even when it cost you everything. Dad, Lewis was crying openly now. Where is he? Is he safe? He's in protective custody. His cover was blown when you exposed the network, but we got him to safety before anyone could hurt him. Can I see him? Agent Moore smiled for the first time. He's actually here. He's been waiting in the next room for the past hour. The door opened, and Anthony Hamilton walked in. He looked older, more tired, but his eyes were bright with pride. Lewis stood up and hugged his father tightly, both of them crying. Dad, I'm so sorry. I almost got you killed. No, son. You saved my life. And you saved the lives of countless other people. The corruption network we brought down was responsible for suffering around the world. They sat together as Anthony explained everything. How he'd been recruited by MI6. How he'd spent 20 years gathering evidence. How Lewis's natural activism had been both a blessing and a concern. When you posted about Bahrain, I was terrified, Anthony admitted. But I was also proud. You were doing the right thing, even though it put you in danger. The car problems, the microphone cutting out, that was all because of your investigation? They knew someone was feeding information to British intelligence. They thought if they pressured you enough, I might reveal myself to protect you. Lewis realized the incredible sacrifice his father had made. 20 years of living a double life. 20 years of putting himself in danger to gather evidence against international criminals. Dad, why didn't you just tell them to leave me alone? Why didn't you blow your cover to protect me? Anthony smiled sadly. Because the mission was bigger than both of us. The evidence we gathered will put dozens of corrupt officials in prison and protect athletes for generations to come. Agent Moore spoke up. Your father's intelligence, combined with your public exposure of the corruption, created the perfect storm. We had the evidence, and you gave us the platform to reveal it to the world. Lewis looked at his father with new understanding. So when I stood up to F1, you were completing a mission that started before you even knew it existed. But Lewis, the courage was all yours. I just provided the background information. What happens now? Lewis asked. Now, the mission is complete, Agent Moore said. The corruption network is destroyed. Marcus Webb and 43 other officials are in prison. Your father can retire from intelligence work and be a normal grandfather to your future children. Anthony laughed. I'm looking forward to being just your dad again. No more secrets, no more lies, no more dangerous meetings. As they left the consulate together, Lewis felt like he was seeing his father for the first time. The man who'd taught him about courage and justice wasn't just a railroad worker with big dreams for his son. He was a hero who'd spent 20 years fighting international corruption. Dad, one more question. The anonymous friend who kept sending us evidence, was that you too? Anthony smiled mysteriously. Some secrets are worth keeping, son. Let's just say you had more help than you knew. As they walked through Monaco's streets, Lewis realized that his fight for justice had been part of something much larger. His father had been fighting the same battle for 20 years, using different methods, but with the same goal. The revolution in Formula One hadn't started with Lewis's Instagram post. It had started with a father's love for his son and a 20-year mission to make the world safer for future generations. Chapter 10. The ultimate truth. 2 years after learning about his father's secret life, Lewis Hamilton stood in a secure facility in London, facing the most shocking truth of all. What he discovered about Anthony's work for MI6 was only the beginning. The real story was about to unfold. Agent Patricia Moore had called him urgently that morning. Lewis, we need to meet immediately. There's something about your father's mission that we didn't tell you. Something that changes everything. Now, sitting in the same type of secure room where he'd first learned about his father's spy work, Lewis felt his world about to shift again. Lewis, what I'm about to tell you will be difficult to accept, Agent Moore began. Your father's 20-year mission wasn't just about gathering intelligence on Formula One corruption. Lewis frowned. What do you mean? Agent Moore opened a new file, even thicker than the last one. Anthony Hamilton wasn't recruited by MI6 because he had access to F1. He was recruited because he had access to you. The words hit Lewis like a punch to the stomach. Me? From the time you were a teenager, British intelligence knew you would become one of the most influential athletes in the world. Your natural sense of justice, your platform, your courage. We knew you would eventually speak out about global issues. Lewis felt sick. So my entire career was planned by intelligence agencies. No, Agent Moore said quickly. Your talent, your drive, your success, that was all genuine. But we knew that someone with your influence would eventually face pressure to stay silent about injustice. We needed someone positioned to protect you when that happened. She showed him documents dating back to 2003, when Lewis was just 18 years old. Your father volunteered for the mission after we approached him. We explained that corrupt governments and organizations would eventually try to silence you because of your platform. Anthony chose to spend 20 years building a case against them to protect his son's right to speak. Lewis stared at the documents in disbelief. So Dad became a spy to protect me? He became a spy to protect your voice. He knew that if you ever tried to speak out about injustice, powerful people would try to destroy you. His mission was to gather enough evidence to destroy them first. Agent Moore pulled out surveillance photos spanning 2 decades. Anthony Hamilton at F1 races, but also at meetings with corrupt officials, arms dealers, and money launderers. Every corrupt sponsor, every dirty government deal, every attempt to use sports for illegal activities. Your father documented it all. He built cases against every person who might eventually try to silence you. Lewis felt tears forming in his eyes. He sacrificed 20 years of his life for me. He sacrificed 20 years to ensure that when you found your voice, no one could take it away. The door to the secure room opened, and Anthony Hamilton walked in. He looked at his son with a mixture of love and concern. Hello, son. I suppose you have questions. Lewis stood up and hugged his father tightly. Dad, why? Why didn't you tell me any of this? Anthony sat down across from his son. Because I needed your activism to be real. If you'd known about my mission, you might have felt pressure to speak out, or afraid to speak out. I needed your conscience to guide you naturally. But all those years, watching me struggle with whether to speak up, were the proudest moments of my life. Anthony interrupted. Watching you choose justice over comfort, truth over safety, that wasn't because of my mission. That was because of who you are. Agent Moore showed Lewis more documents. Your father's intelligence helped us build cases against Marcus Webb and his network years before you ever spoke out. When you finally exposed them publicly, we already had everything we needed to destroy them. Lewis realized the incredible scope of his father's sacrifice. So when I was afraid of losing my career, you were never going to lose your career, Anthony said gently. I'd spent 20 years making sure that anyone who tried to silence you would be destroyed instead. The anonymous warnings, the saved evidence, the mysterious help we received, that was all part of your operation. Anthony smiled. I had to be very careful. I couldn't reveal myself directly, but I could guide you and protect you without you knowing. Agent Moore opened another section of the file. There's more, Lewis. Your father's mission wasn't just about F1. We knew that if you spoke out about one injustice, you'd eventually speak out about others. Anthony gathered evidence about corruption in multiple sports. She showed him documents about soccer, tennis, basketball, and Olympic organizations. Your father spent 20 years building cases against corrupt officials across all major sports. Lewis was overwhelmed. So my fight against F1 corruption was just the beginning. It was the test case, Agent Moore explained. We needed to see if our protection system worked. When you successfully exposed F1 corruption without losing your career, we knew the system was ready for larger battles. Anthony leaned forward. Son, the revolution you started in Formula One was designed to spread to every sport in the world. You were never fighting alone. You were the visible leader of a 20-year intelligence operation. Lewis felt dizzy. Everything he thought he knew about his fight for justice was different. So I was never really brave. I was just protected. No, Anthony said firmly. You were incredibly brave. The protection was just insurance. You still chose to speak out when it would have been easier to stay quiet. You still risked everything for your principles. Agent Moore nodded. The courage was always yours, Lewis. We just made sure that courage wouldn't be punished. What happens now? Lewis asked. Now, the real mission begins, Agent Moore said. Your success in F1 proved that athletes can speak out against injustice without losing their careers. We're ready to expand that protection to athletes in every sport. She showed him a new document marked Operation Athletic Justice. We're creating a global network to protect any athlete who speaks out about corruption, human rights, or social justice. Your father's 20 years of work, combined with Your public success has made this possible. Lewis looked at the scope of the operation. Hundreds of intelligence agents in dozens of countries, all working to protect athletes' rights to speak about injustice. You want me to lead this? You already are leading it, Anthony said. Everything you've done, every cause you've supported, every athlete you've inspired. That's what this operation looks like in public. Agent Moore smiled. Lewis, you've been the face of athletic justice for years. Now you're just learning about the infrastructure supporting you. Lewis thought about all the athletes around the world who'd found courage to speak out after seeing his example. Soccer players criticizing World Cup corruption. Tennis players discussing mental health. Basketball players fighting racism. How many athletes are protected by this operation? Currently, over 300 worldwide, Agent Moore said, and the number grows every month. Lewis realized that his individual fight for justice had become something much larger. A global movement, with institutional support, intelligence backing, and the power to protect athletes everywhere. Dad, do you regret the 20 years? Anthony smiled. Son, watching you become a man who chooses justice over comfort was worth every day of those 20 years. You didn't just become a great driver, you became a great human being. And the mission isn't over, Agent Moore added. There are still corrupt organizations, still governments trying to silence athletes, still injustices that need exposing. Lewis looked at his father, then at Agent Moore, then at the documents spread across the table. His personal fight had been part of something incredible, a multi-decade operation to ensure that athletes everywhere could speak truth to power. What's the next target? Lewis asked. Anthony laughed. I knew you'd ask that. There's a corruption network in Olympic sports that makes the F1 scandal look small. And several governments using soccer tournaments to hide human rights abuses, Agent Moore added. Lewis stood up, feeling the weight and excitement of what lay ahead. Then let's get to work. As they left the secure facility together, Anthony put his arm around his son's shoulder. Lewis, I have one more confession. What's that, Dad? I'm not retiring from this work. I want to keep fighting alongside you. Lewis smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. They walked out into the London sunshine, father and son, ready to continue. A mission that had started with love and grown into a global revolution for justice. The truth was finally complete. Lewis Hamilton's fight for justice hadn't been a lonely battle against overwhelming odds. It had been the culmination of a 20-year operation designed by a father's love and supported by the full power of international intelligence. But the courage, the principles, the choice to speak out despite the risks, that had always been Lewis's own. And now, with the truth revealed and the infrastructure in place, that courage would help protect athletes around the world for generations to come. The revolution was no longer just beginning. It was unstoppable. That we'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and tell us your city or country. It's amazing to connect with viewers from all around the world who believe in standing up for what's right. If this story inspired you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories about courage, justice, and people who change the world. Your support helps us bring you these important stories every week. And don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. Stories like Lewis Hamilton's remind us that one person's courage can spark a global revolution. By sharing these stories, you're helping spread kindness and awareness about the power we all have to make a difference. Thank you for listening. And remember, never let anyone silence your voice when you're fighting for what's right. Until next time, keep standing up for justice.